The envelope had been sitting on the kitchen table since the previous evening, and Nadia Cole had walked past it 4 times already without opening it. She knew what it said. She knew the number. She had done enough conversations with Roy, the landlord, to understand that the carefully worded language in his letters was always moving toward the same destination, and the destination was the same number said in a different order of words. She filled the kettle. She turned it on. She stood with her back to the table and looked at the window, which showed her the narrow channel of gray sky between her building and the one across the alley, and she thought about the month ahead in the focused, specific way she had learned to think about problems. Not the whole shape of the problem at once, because that way led nowhere useful, but the next necessary step. The kettle clicked off. She made tea. She turned around and opened the envelope. The number was what she expected. She folded the letter and put it in the drawer under the toaster, where she put things she needed to deal with, but not at 7 in the morning, with 2 children about to come downstairs. Lily came first. She always came first. 7 years old and constitutionally incapable of being quiet, she arrived in the kitchen already mid-sentence, telling Nadia about a dream she had had, about a horse that could also fly, and the horse had a name, and the name was not a normal name, and she had been trying to remember the name since she woke up, and she could almost get it. Grace came a few minutes later, 9 years old and already carrying her book, moving through the morning with the contained purposefulness of a child who had decided early that the world was more interesting than most people gave it credit for, and was therefore always slightly ahead of it. She sat at the table and opened to her page without being told. Nadia made cereal for both of them. She made toast for herself. She sat at the table with her tea and ate, and listened to Lily's ongoing account of the flying horse, and looked at Grace, who was reading and eating simultaneously, without spilling anything, and felt the particular texture of a morning that is ordinary and dear, and also slightly fragile, in a way she was not going to examine before 8 o'clock. After the girls were in their coats and bags were checked and Lily's second glove was located behind the radiator and Grace's library book was added to the front pocket of her bag, Nadia called Patricia, her neighbor on the 3rd floor, who was retired and who watched the girls on mornings when Nadia needed to be somewhere early. Patricia said, of course. She said, come up whenever. She said she had made cinnamon rolls. Lily perked up immediately. The horse dream was temporarily set aside. Nadia thanked her and hung up and stood in the kitchen for a moment after the girls had run upstairs, the apartment quiet around her for the first time since 6:40. She stood with the letter from the drawer in her hand and read it again, once, and then she sat down and opened her laptop. She had found the agency 2 nights before. She had been awake at 11:30, with the specific wakefulness of a person who has run out of ordinary options and is now scanning the edge of the map where things get unusual. The agency's website was clean and professional. It placed staff in private households, assistants, companions, coordinators, people whose job it was to make the daily life of a private individual function. The salary ranges were, by Nadia's standard, not quite real-seeming. She had read them twice. She called the main number. A woman named Carol answered. Carol had the kind of voice that manages warmth and professionalism simultaneously, without either one compromising the other, and she described the available position with the care of a person who has given this particular description before and has learned where the difficult parts are. The position, personal assistant to a private individual, north side of Chicago. Live-out arrangement, 6 days a week, hours that varied. The salary was the number Nadia had seen on the website, which Carol confirmed without hesitation. Nadia asked why the pay was so high. Carol paused. Not long, but it was a real pause, the kind that means a decision is being made. She said the role had been difficult to fill. She said the client had complex needs, and that the position required a level of composure and adaptability that not everyone could sustain. She said 9 individuals had been placed in the role in the preceding 6 months, and that none of them had continued past their first day. Nadia asked her to repeat that number. Carol confirmed it. 9. Nadia asked what had caused them to leave. Carol said the client had a demanding personality, and that the environment could be challenging, and that the agency believed the right individual would find the role both professionally and personally rewarding. Nadia recognized the architecture of that answer. She did not push on it. She wrote down the address, the reporting time, and the name of the person she would be meeting. She asked Carol to send the position brief. She read the brief that evening while the girls were asleep. It was 3 pages. It covered the practical scope of the role in careful language: medical schedule coordination, correspondence management, household administration, day-to-day logistical support. The section titled Client Background was written the way official documents are written when the full story is not being offered, but the writer knows you know they know it. His name was Enzo Marchetti, 58. Sustained a significant injury 5 years ago, the nature of which had left him without the use of his legs. Resided in a private household with a long-term household manager and part-time domestic staff. Required consistent, discreet, and capable personal assistance. Nothing about what his life had been before the injury, nothing about why 9 people had walked out in 6 months. She closed the document and searched his name. The results were limited and mostly dated. His name appeared in the margins of things. A few articles about organizations she did not recognize. A business filing for a consulting firm that had not been active in years. One photograph. The photograph was old, taken from across a restaurant, the subject visible in 3/4 profile, looking toward something to the left of the frame. He was a large man even then, broad through the shoulders, with the particular posture of someone who has spent years in rooms where posture communicated authority. His face in the photograph held no visible expression, which was its own kind of expression. She looked at the photograph for a long time. She was not pretending to herself that she did not understand what she was reading between the lines of the brief and the sparse search results. She was a practical woman. She had spent enough of her adult life in circumstances that required her to see clearly without flinching. She saw clearly. She was not frightened exactly, but she held what she saw carefully, the way you hold something that has weight. Then she looked at the landlord's letter on the counter. She thought about September, and the school fees and winter coming and Grace's coat from last year that was already an inch too short at the wrists. She set her alarm for 5:30. She ironed the navy blouse with the 3 small buttons at the collar. She put her hair up. She left the girls with Patricia and drove north through the morning traffic, past the river, into the quiet streets of the neighborhood where the houses had stone facades and old trees, and the kind of unhurried permanence that money, held across generations, produces. The house sat at the end of a driveway lined with elm trees tall enough that their branches met overhead and turned the approach into something that felt deliberate, like something chosen. The house itself was stone and square and older than the street around it. No sharp metal gates, no obvious security presence, just a structure that said everything it needed to say by simply existing solidly. A man opened the front door before she reached the top step. He was in his 60s, slim, with gray hair cut with mathematical precision, and a face that had been practicing the art of controlled expression for so long that it had become his natural state. He wore dark trousers and a white shirt and watched her come up the steps with the calm attention of someone who had seen many people arrive at this door and had developed an opinion about most of them within the first 10 seconds. He said his name was Gerald. He said she should follow him. The entry hall smelled like wood polish, and underneath that something medical. The smell of equipment and routines organized around a body that required management. She knew that smell from her 2 years at the care facility, and it did not unsettle her. She noted it and moved on. Gerald walked her past a sitting room that was immaculate and unused, past a bare hallway, no photographs, no art, no object on any surface, down a short corridor and into a large room at the back of the house. The room faced a garden. The garden was unmaintained in a way that had crossed the line from neglected into something organic, with its own logic. Old elms continued along the garden wall. The morning light came through the glass level and pale, and landed on the floor in a long rectangle. Enzo Marchetti was at the window. He had his back to her. Gerald left without a word. She stood in the doorway for a moment, taking in the room. A table along the near wall with papers and 6 prescription bottles, and a weekly medication organizer sitting empty, and a glass of water that had been there since the previous evening. Papers spread across the floor in a fan at the table's edge. A small desk in the corner with a closed laptop. A chair near the window, angled slightly, as though occasionally used. He did not turn around. She walked to the table and crouched down and began gathering the papers from the floor. He said, without turning, that she should leave them. She said she would just put them in order. He said he had not asked for that. She said she understood, and she continued collecting the papers, stacking them carefully, aligning the edges, and placing them back on the table with a small hardcover book positioned as a stop at the table's edge so they would not slide again. Then she turned to the medication organizer. He turned around. The chair moved in a smooth, controlled arc. He was heavier than the photograph, but not soft. The weight sat differently, carried by a frame that had once been used to physical command and had adapted to its new circumstances with the same force of will, simply directed inward now rather than outward. His face was worn and angular, and his dark eyes were steady in the way that very long habits of watching produce in a person. He told her the agency had sent 9 candidates before her. She said she was aware. He said none of them had lasted the day. She said she had heard that. He asked her why she expected to be any different. She said she did not know whether she would be. She asked him which bottle on the table was the morning medication, because the labels were facing the wall and she wanted to establish the correct schedule. He did not answer. She made a note on the small pad she had brought. She turned back to the table and began to work through the medication bottles with the methodical attention she brought to anything that mattered and that she intended to get right. He watched her. He did not call Gerald. He did not tell her to leave. After a long moment, he turned back to the window. She took that as the beginning of something. She spent the next hour in that room, moving through it with the quiet efficiency of a person who has decided to make themselves useful and does not require applause for it. She organized the medication table into a system she could hand off to anyone and that any person could read at a glance. She stacked the papers with a handwritten index note on top. She replaced the old water. She noted the items that needed to be added to the weekly pharmacy order. She did all of this without commentary and without seeking acknowledgement. When she was done, she told him she was going to make tea and asked if he wanted a cup. He said no. She made 2 cups and brought his back without ceremony, setting it on the small table beside his chair within easy reach. She sat in the chair near the door, drank her own tea, and reviewed the morning in her own mind with the focused attention she brought to first days. He did not tell her to leave. By 4 in the afternoon, Gerald had walked her through the practical scope of the role in detail. The medication schedule, which needed to be rebuilt from the current disorder into something consistent, the correspondence, a mix of legal, financial, and personal, requiring sorting and response drafting. The coordination of physical therapy sessions, which Gerald described with a particular careful neutrality. The overlap with Bet, the woman who came to cook 3 times a week, which required scheduling, and anything else the day produced, which Gerald described as variable in a tone that communicated volumes. She asked what variable typically looked like. Gerald said it differed. She thanked him and wrote it in her notes. She drove home through the early dark of a November evening, the city amber and cold around her. She did not turn the radio on. She drove and thought about the house, and the man at the window, and the question she understood he was asking, not the one he had spoken aloud about why she expected to last longer than the others, but the real one underneath it, the one about whether she would remain when remaining cost something. She did not know the answer yet. She knew she had come back the next day, and she knew what drove that. And she knew that some of the drive was financial and some of it was not, and she was not in the habit of examining the part that was not too closely. She was in the habit of moving forward and paying attention to what she found. She collected the girls from Patricia. Lily had been working on a drawing of the flying horse from her dream, which she presented immediately. Grace had strong opinions about the spelling of the horse's name. They argued about this with the focused energy they brought to most disagreements, which was total and genuine, and gone in 3 minutes. Nadia made dinner. She listened to both of them. She let the evening be the evening. She set the alarm for 5:30. In the morning she went back. The second morning had the same shape as the first, and so did the third and the fourth. Gerald at the door, the hallway, the main room, Enzo at the window. She set her bag down, picked up the task list, and began. She had made a stop at the pharmacy on the way, collecting the 2 prescriptions that had been ready since the previous week. She put them on the medication table and updated the schedule. She had, the previous evening, spent an hour creating a proper weekly chart that made the medication routine visible at a glance, which bottles for morning, which for evening, which were contingency, which had dietary restrictions attached. She printed it at the library and laminated it at the office supply store 2 blocks from her apartment. She taped it to the inside of the cabinet above the medication table. She did not tell Enzo she had done this. It was just there, available, the way useful things should be. Wednesday came with its own weather. She was near the doorway of the main room, carrying the correspondence folder, when she heard it, the sharp, deliberate sound of a hand hitting the edge of a tray. Not an accident. She had worked long enough with people in difficult physical circumstances to know the difference between the sounds a body makes by accident and the sounds a person makes on purpose. This was on purpose. The tray went across the floor. The plate and the glass went with it. The glass cracked against the baseboard. The napkin settled in the corner. He put his hands in his lap and looked at the wall. She stood still. She let the moment exist for what it was. She did not speak. She did not alter her expression in any way that required him to respond to it. Then she went to the kitchen. She collected what she needed. She came back and cleaned the floor the way it needed to be cleaned. The glass first, carefully, checking the floor twice for fragments, then the food, then the tile wiped down and rinsed. She went back to the kitchen and disposed of everything properly. Bet had made enough that morning that there was a sufficient second portion. She plated it. She brought it back. She set it on the table without looking at him and went back to the desk in the corner. He ate. She registered it without appearing to register it. The sounds of a meal being eaten, the particular quality of a silence that is still present but has released some of its pressure. She went on with the correspondence. Thursday brought the physical therapy appointment. He told her he was not going and that she should call and cancel it. She called the center. She asked them to move the appointment to the following Tuesday. She thanked the scheduler and hung up. She came back and told Enzo she had moved it to Tuesday in case he changed his mind, and that if he wanted to cancel entirely, he was welcome to contact them directly. He said he had told her to cancel it, not move it. She said she understood, and that she had moved it anyway, and that the Tuesday slot was available. He said nothing. She returned to her work. That evening was the conversation with Gerald in the hallway. He stopped her near the front door as she was putting on her coat, and he spoke to her in the way he spoke when he had decided something needed to be said. He told her she was doing well. Then he told her about the woman from the agency who had ended up in the hospital after her first week, not because of anything physical, but because of the accumulated weight of the environment and a personality that had not been suited to absorbing it without damage. He said the woman had recovered. He said he was telling Nadia because she deserved the full picture. She asked if the woman was all right. He said she had left the city and was doing well. She thanked him for telling her. She finished buttoning her coat and said goodnight. In the car, she sat for a full minute with the engine off. Her hands were in her lap and she was looking at the dashboard, and she was not pretending, even to herself, that the information Gerald had just given her was comfortable information. It was not. It was the real weight of the thing she was doing, delivered plainly by the one person in that house who seemed to believe she could handle plain information. She started the engine. She drove home and made dinner and listened to Lily's ongoing development of the flying horse mythology, which had now grown to include a complete family tree and a homeland and a weather system, and she helped Grace with the history project, which required finding 3 primary sources, and she sat at the table after the girls were in bed and did the math again. The math worked. It worked better now than it had in October, and there was something else in the calculation that had not been there at the beginning. Something she was not able to quantify, but that she was beginning to understand was also a reason to go back. She set the alarm. On Friday, the quality of the silence in the main room was different. She felt it when she walked in. Gerald's face was the same. The room was the same. Enzo was at the window in the same position, but the silence had changed, from the tightly held silence of a door being refused to the ordinary silence of a person being quiet. She made tea without asking. She brought his cup to the window table and went back to work. He reached for it while she was still 3 steps away from the desk. She kept walking. The following Tuesday, she arrived to find Enzo in the hallway, already dressed, Gerald pulling the car to the front. He moved toward the door without looking at her. She held it open. He went through. He went to the physical therapy appointment. He returned 2 hours later with a working tiredness that was different in every way from the gray, directionless exhaustion she had seen from him on bad days. This was the tiredness of effort. She brought water. She cleared the afternoon of anything non-essential, quietly, without discussing it with him. Bet told her, 2 weeks later, sideways and while doing something else, that the house felt different. She said she had been coming here long enough to feel its moods the way a sailor feels weather, and that it had been a difficult ship for a long time, and that something had changed. Nadia said she was glad. Bet said it was Nadia. That was the thing that had changed. Nadia said she had simply done the job. Bet said that was exactly the thing no one else had managed to do. They were quiet for a moment. Then Bet went back to her pot, and Nadia went back to her folder, and the kitchen smelled like garlic, and the afternoon went on. She arrived early on the morning that changed things. Gerald met her at the door with his face arranged in that specific careful way it got when something had happened and he was managing it. He told her Mr. Marchetti had had a difficult night. He used the word difficult with the precise economy of a man who does not use words lightly. She went inside. Enzo was in the center of the room, not at the window. The wheelchair was at an odd angle, one wheel slightly inward, as though it had been parked quickly and not corrected. His left hand was on the armrest, in the particular grip of someone for whom that contact is the most stable thing available. He was looking at the space in front of him. She said good morning. She set her bag down. She went to the kitchen and made tea. When she came back, she set his cup near him and took her usual chair and opened the folder. The room was quiet for a long time. Then he said he had been on the floor last night. She looked up from the folder. He was not looking at her. He was looking at the middle distance, at nothing specific, in the way a person looks when they are going to say something difficult and cannot afford to watch another face receive it. He said he had shifted wrong after midnight and gone over the side of the chair. He said he had been on the floor for 40 minutes before he decided to call Gerald. He said it the way he said everything. Flat, direct, no ornament. He was not seeking sympathy. She understood that completely. He was reporting a fact to the one person who had demonstrated an ability to receive facts without turning them into an occasion. She held his gaze when he finally looked at her. She said she was glad Gerald had been there. He said Gerald had had the look. He described Gerald's look, the careful, controlled face that Gerald wore when he was deciding whether to say something and had decided not to. He said he could not stand that look. She said she understood. He asked her if she had that look right now. She said no. She said she was thinking about whether the chair's armrest rail had been checked recently by someone qualified to check it, because if it was a mechanical factor, it was a fixable one. He said it was not the rail. He said it was a careless movement and the chair was fine. She nodded. She wrote a note in her folder. He watched her write it and asked what she was noting. She said it was a task for herself, something to follow up with Gerald, nothing he needed to know about. He watched her a moment longer. Then he asked if she had eaten breakfast. She said she had not. She had come in early. He told her she should eat. He said it in the tone of a person who gives instructions reflexively, because instruction giving was the reflex that remained when everything else had been revised. She said she would get something from the kitchen once she finished the folder. He turned away. She finished the folder. The task she had written was a note to herself about establishing a quiet overnight adjustment, not a monitoring system, nothing that would announce itself as concern, just a small practical change to the nightly routine that would reduce the probability of another floor incident without requiring Enzo to request anything. She would frame it to Gerald as administrative, which it was. She went to the kitchen and ate a piece of toast. She thought about what he had told her, the 40 minutes on the floor, the decision to finally call. She understood what the 40 minutes cost. She understood it the way you understand something that belongs to a private vocabulary, because you have had your own version of it. The internal argument between the part of you that needs help and the part of you that cannot bear to need it. She understood. She filed it in the place where the real things went, and she went back to work. The afternoon moved in its usual way. She was reorganizing the medication shelf when she bumped the small framed card behind it. She caught it before it fell. She held it for a moment. The paper was old, not fragile but soft, worn by proximity to hands over many years. The writing was in dark ink, in Italian, in a handwriting that had once been very accustomed to putting words on paper. She set it back exactly as it had been, faced exactly as it had been. She did not look at it again that day, but she thought about it for the rest of the afternoon. In a house systematically emptied of personal objects, no photographs, no art, nothing hanging on the walls, this single handwritten card in a frame was what remained of a life that had contained more than this. That evening, gathering her things to leave, she found herself saying something she had not planned. She mentioned that Grace had a school play on Friday. She said it the way she would mention any scheduling fact, informational, not personal. She said she might need to leave 30 minutes earlier than usual, if that was workable. He was at the window. He said nothing for a moment. Then he said it was fine. The next morning, at the bottom of Gerald's task list, in Gerald's small, precise handwriting, there was a note that her finishing time on Friday had been moved up by 45 minutes. She read it twice. She folded it and put it in her folder. She went to the kitchen and stood at the counter for a moment, one hand flat on the tile. She felt something that was not gratitude exactly, and not warmth exactly, but was something more fundamental. The sense of being acknowledged as a complete person, with a life that extended beyond these walls, of being seen as someone rather than something. It was a small gesture. She did not make it larger than it was, but it was not nothing, and she was honest with herself about that. She made tea and started the day. In January, Owen, the physical therapist, methodical and precise, began working with Enzo on a new set of goals, not walking. That was not the conversation, and she was careful never to imply it was. But a different order of independence, specific transfers and positional shifts that would reduce his reliance on Gerald for the daily practical requirements of his physical life, the reliance that she understood, from the way Enzo held himself during those interactions, was a daily source of friction against his sense of himself. The work was harder than the previous program. She could tell from how Enzo came back from sessions in January. Not the gray flatness of despair, but the real, earned depletion of physical work done correctly. She adjusted around it without discussing it. She moved Bet's meal timing. She kept the post-session hours clear of anything that required attention or engagement. These were not large accommodations. They were the small, precise adjustments of a person who has paid enough attention to understand what a situation requires. One Friday in January, Owen's notes contained a line that was not in his usual clinical language. It said the client had achieved the target transfer independently for the first time. She read it. She put the folder back. She went on with the day. She said nothing to Enzo. She understood completely that the moment belonged to him, that it had happened in a room with only Owen, who had noted it the way he noted all measurable outcomes, and that the value of it was exactly in the fact that it had not required an audience. She was glad it had happened that way. In February, she noticed the framed card had moved from the shelf behind the medication table to the windowsill, closer to where Enzo positioned himself each morning, in the direct path of the morning light. She said nothing. She registered it with the same quiet attention she gave everything in that house that shifted, and she let it mean what it meant. Bet observed, sideways and while checking the oven, that the house felt less closed than it used to. She said it without looking up. She said she did not know what Nadia had done exactly, but that it was working. Nadia said she had not done anything that required a name. Bet made a sound that communicated a polite disagreement and kept checking the oven. The morning she found the broken window started like every other morning. She came down at 7:10. She pushed through the back door of the building. She walked toward her car in the parking lot with her keys in her hand and the cold on her face. She saw it from 15 feet away. The driver's side window was gone, not cracked, not spiderwebbed in place the way glass breaks when it is hit once and holds. Gone. The safety glass was spread across the parking lot in a pattern that was almost neat, the way a pattern is almost neat when someone who knows what they are doing has made it. She stopped walking. The lot was empty. A cat sat on the far wall. The camera nearest to her car, the one that had not been working since the spring, was dark. She stepped forward. She looked into the car through the open window frame. There was an envelope on the seat. She put on her gloves before she touched it. She opened the car door, and she picked up the envelope, and she opened it, and she read what was inside. It was short. It said, in clear, unambiguous language, that she should stop coming to work at the address on the north side. It said she was involved in a situation she did not fully understand, and at the bottom, in the same plain language as everything else, it said the name of the school where Grace and Lily went every morning. It said the name of the school where Lily's classroom had a mural of a sun, and where Grace's best friend Caroline always saved her a seat at lunch, and where both of them had been going for 3 years with the specific comfortable confidence of children who feel safe in a place. She folded the letter, she put it in her bag, she breathed once, steadily and deliberately, the way she did when something required her to stay very clear. Then she called Gerald. He answered on the second ring. She told him she needed to come in immediately, before her scheduled time, and that she needed to speak with Mr. Marchetti directly. She said it was urgent. She said it in the tone that communicated exactly how urgent, without requiring elaboration. Gerald said to come now. She drove north with the left side of her face open to the November cold through the missing window. The air hit her directly, cold and honest, and she did not try to lean away from it. She kept both hands on the wheel and drove at the speed limit and did not allow the fear to take up more space than it had already claimed. She was afraid. She was clear about that. She was afraid in the specific, physical way that fear works when a threat has been made against your children, a cold tightening that starts in the chest and radiates outward. She did not pretend it was not there, but she had learned, across a life that had required this of her more than once, that the best thing to do with fear, in a situation that required action, was to feel it without letting it make the decisions. Gerald met her at the door and walked her straight to the main room. Enzo was not at the window. He was in the center of the room, already facing the door, already waiting. Gerald had said something to prepare him. His face was attentive in the particular way it became when something required his full faculties, rather than just his endurance. She told him everything. She described the window and the envelope and the letter. She showed him the photograph she had taken of the parking lot. She read him the relevant section, including the part with the school name. She said all of it in the same tone she used to report any fact. Clear, complete, without exaggeration, and without minimizing. She was afraid and she showed it plainly, because hiding it would have cost energy she needed, and because she had learned, in the weeks of working alongside this man, that he responded to honesty and was bored by performance. He listened without moving. His hands were in his lap. His face did nothing she could read. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he told her to leave. He said it without raising his voice. He said it with the quietness of something that was costing him to say. He told her to take her daughters somewhere safe, out of the city if she could manage it. He said she should not come back. He said she had no obligation to this house that was worth what she was currently holding. He said all of this directly, without softening it, and he said it while looking at her with the full, steady attention he rarely directed at anything. She looked at him. She said she was not leaving. He said she did not understand what she was dealing with. She said she understood enough to know that leaving would not make the situation safer for her daughters. She said that if the point of the letter was to remove her from the house, then leaving was giving them exactly what they wanted, and she was not in the habit of doing that. He said she was making a serious mistake. She said maybe. She opened her folder. She asked him whether Thursday's physical therapy appointment was at the usual time or had it been moved. He stared at her. The room was very quiet. He said it was at 2. She wrote it down. He turned to the window. She heard him say something under his breath, not loud enough to make out, but she understood the shape of it, the assessment of a person recalibrating what they thought they knew. She went about the morning's work. She moved through the room in the usual way. She updated the medication schedule. She worked through the correspondence. She coordinated with Gerald about the week's appointments. She did not look at the fear, or give it any more room than it had already taken. She let the work be the work. Late in the afternoon, Gerald came to the study where she was working. He said, simply and directly, that she would find things to be different by the following morning. He said it as a plain statement of fact. He said it the way Gerald said everything, without flourish, meaning exactly what he said. She told him she understood. She thanked him. He said he thought she was a person of particular character. She said she thought he had enough data to form an opinion. He almost smiled. It arrived and was gone in under a second, but it had been real. 2 days later, she came down to the parking lot to find her car window replaced. The glass was new and fitted perfectly. No note, no invoice, no explanation. She stood beside the car for a moment, her hand on the door frame, feeling the smooth, cold edge of new glass under her fingers. She got in and drove to work. The weeks after that had a different quality. Not a warmer quality, not a softer quality. The house was still the house, and Enzo was still Enzo, and the work was still the work. But there was something in the air between them that had passed through the fire and been confirmed. She had been asked to leave and had not left. He had known she would not leave and had asked anyway, and both of them understood why, and neither of them discussed it. He watched her differently now, not warmly, not softly, with the particular quality of attention that a person gives to something they have decided to take seriously, something they have revised their understanding of, and found more solid than they originally estimated. She registered it without naming it. She kept working. The garden started to change without being asked. It happened slowly, the way most real things happen, with none of the drama that the amount of change eventually warranted. In December there was nothing visible. The frost had pressed the grass flat, and everything was the gray-white of a garden in its dormant state. But by January there were early signs along the wall, small and persistent. By February there was clear green at the center of the beds, pushing through with the particular conviction of something that had been waiting underground for a long time and had decided it was ready. Enzo tracked it. She noticed because his chair began to position differently in the mornings, closer to the glass, angled to the left, changing in small increments week by week as whatever was growing along the garden wall developed. She adjusted the small table beside him accordingly, ensuring his tea was always within reach, regardless of where the chair was, and she did not remark on the adjustment or the reason for it. Some accommodations are most effective when they are invisible. The physical therapy work had become, by March, a regular and uncontested part of Enzo's week. Owen no longer had to confirm appointments the day before. Bet no longer had to rearrange meals around the uncertainty of whether a session would actually occur. It was simply part of the week, absorbed into the rhythm of the house, the way most things eventually are when they have been shown to serve a real purpose. Owen was not an effusive man. He communicated in degrees of rotation and repetitions per set, in measurements and targets, in the language of physical reality, stripped of anything that could be mistaken for sentiment. But she had learned to read the data underneath his technical language, the way you learn to read any specialist's shorthand when you work alongside them long enough. The data said that the work was producing results, not dramatic results, not the kind that rewrites a medical story, but real ones, in the practical sense, in the quality of daily physical management, in the reduction of the friction that came from requiring assistance for things that could, with sufficient work, be handled independently. She did not share the data with Enzo. She was certain he already knew. Owen would have told him in his precise, unsentimental way, in the language of numbers. What she could offer was to ensure that the rest of the house organized itself around the outcomes without making them a topic of discussion. She did this without drawing attention to it. It was part of the job. The real job, the one underneath the task lists. One afternoon in February, she came in to find a visitor in the main room, a man in his 40s, well-dressed, with the kind of composed steadiness that suggested a long career in situations where composure was the primary professional requirement. He was in the chair by the window, the chair that was rarely sat in. He and Enzo were talking. Gerald met her in the hallway and explained, quietly, that this was a former business associate, that the meeting had been arranged, that it would last approximately an hour. He suggested she work elsewhere in the house. She thanked him and spent the hour in the study with the door closed, working through the month's correspondence. When the visitor left, Enzo was quieter than usual for the rest of the afternoon, not the hostile quiet of the first weeks, a processing quiet, the quiet of a person sitting with information that has changed the shape of something. She worked without interrupting it. She brought tea. She let the afternoon proceed in its own way. At the end of the day, as she was preparing to leave, Enzo said something that she had not expected. He said she had not asked him anything about his past since the day she arrived. She said that was true. He said every other person the agency had sent had asked. He said some of them had been obvious about it, questions dressed up as conversation, curiosity trying to look like concern. Some had been more careful, but he had always known what they were doing. She said she had not felt the need to ask. She said the information she needed to do the job was available in the practical requirements of the job. The other information was not her business unless he chose to share it. He was quiet for a moment. He said he was curious what picture she had formed, given the available information. She considered this honestly. She said she thought he was a man who had lived for a long time by a particular form of capability, the kind that involves control and command and the confidence of someone who has always been able to determine outcomes. She said she thought the injury had not broken that capability but had broken the environment in which it operated, and that the difficulty was not the chair or the body, but the enormous ongoing work of becoming a different kind of capable person. She stopped. She held his gaze. He said that was not wrong. She said goodnight. On the drive home, that conversation sat with her. Not wrong. From him, in his language, that was the equivalent of a long speech. She thought about it precisely once, carefully, and then she let it go. She was good at letting things go that were not hers to carry. A week before Christmas, she brought Grace and Lily to the house for a morning. A scheduling conflict with Patricia had produced a Saturday where she had administrative work to complete, and no arrangement for the girls. Gerald had mentioned, weeks earlier, that a visit could be accommodated. She had filed it away, and now she used it. She brought them in through the front door, Lily's eyes went wide in the entry hall and stayed wide. Grace looked at everything with her systematic attention, the attention of someone taking notes. Gerald walked them through the house while Nadia worked in the study. After 40 minutes, she heard footsteps near the main room, and then Lily's voice carrying clearly from the direction of the window. She finished her paragraph and went to the doorway. Enzo was in the center of the room. Lily was standing 4 feet from the wheelchair with the direct curiosity of a 7-year-old who sees something interesting and does not yet have the adult reflex of pretending otherwise. Grace was a step behind her sister, more careful, watching. Lily was looking at the chair. She told him it looked kind of cool, actually. The room was very quiet. Enzo looked at her. His face did something she had not seen it do before. Not warmth exactly, not the blankness either, but something in between. A stillness that was receiving Lily's complete directness and processing it without the usual defenses. He said it was not cool. Lily considered this with the seriousness she brought to corrections. She said the wheel part looked interesting. He said it was a chair with wheels. Lily thought about this and said that described a lot of things that were interesting. From behind Lily, Grace made a sound that might have been a suppressed laugh. Enzo looked from Lily to Grace. His face moved again, in that direction, the one without a clear name. Nadia stepped into the doorway and said it was time to go back to Gerald's part of the house because she had another 20 minutes of work to finish. Lily said okay, and turned and went without argument, which was unusual. Grace paused in the doorway. She looked at Enzo with her careful gray eyes and said it was nice to meet him. He said it was fine. Grace nodded, as though this were a perfectly satisfactory reply, and followed her sister. Nadia looked at Enzo for a moment. He had turned back to the window. She went back to the study and finished the work. She collected her daughters, thanked Gerald, and drove home. In the car, Lily said the house was very big and asked whether the man in the wheelchair was scary. Grace said she had not thought so. Lily said Grace never thought anything was scary. Grace said she thought the important things were scary. Lily said that was not a reasonable way to divide things. They argued about this all the way home in the particular way they argued about things, with full commitment and no hard feelings. Nadia made lunch and sat at the table after the girls were occupied and thought for a moment about the look on Enzo's face when Lily had said the wheelchair looked cool, the way the careful blankness had moved, just a fraction, in the direction of something else. She did not allow herself to hold it too tightly. It was his, not hers to carry. She simply noted it and moved on. In March, the garden came fully alive, which was to say it continued doing what it had been doing since January, which was growing without permission or direction towards something it had decided on underground. By the middle of March, there were flowers beginning along the wall. She could not identify them from the window, but they were there, pale and definite against the old stone. Enzo noticed. She had known he was noticing since January, from the incremental adjustments of his chair position. By March, he was staying at the window in the afternoons later than he used to, past the point where the light left the garden and the wall was in shadow, as though the garden continued to hold his attention even when the visible part of it had gone dark. She made the tea, she adjusted the table, she said nothing. Owen left a note in the post-session folder in March. It said, at the bottom, in a line that was not in his usual technical language, "The client stated today that he intends to continue." Owen had noted it with the brevity appropriate to a man who communicated primarily in numbers, and the brevity was exactly right, because the sentence did not require addition. She read it. She put the folder down. She stood in the study for a moment and looked out the window at the garden wall and the things coming up along it. She thought about the word intend. She thought about what it meant for a person who had spent 5 years in a house that had become, degree by degree, the location of stopping rather than continuing, to say that word aloud to a person who was writing it down. She thought about it for the appropriate amount of time. Then she went back to work. That afternoon, when she was preparing to leave, Enzo called her name. She turned. He was at the window. He was not looking at her, but at the garden, at the pale flowers beginning along the wall. He said her salary would be changed on the following pay cycle. He said the amount had been arranged with Gerald. He said it in the flat, factual tone he used for all facts, as though it were a logistical update and not, as she understood it to be, a form of acknowledgement. She said thank you. He said it was appropriate for the role as it had developed. She put on her coat. She gathered her bag. She was at the door when she stopped. She turned back. She said she wanted to tell him something. He waited. He was still looking at the garden. She said that when she had come to this house in October, the reason she had stayed past the first day was financial. She said she wanted to be honest about that because she thought honesty was owed, and because she was not ashamed of it. The money had mattered, and still mattered, and the fact of it had made everything else possible. She paused. She said that was only part of the reason she had kept coming back. He turned his head, not fully, just slightly, the angle that meant he was listening with full attention without committing the rest of himself to the gesture. She said she had stayed because she had recognized something on the first day that she had not had a name for until much later. She said she thought the name for it was this, that she understood what it meant to be in a situation that required you to become someone you had not planned to become, without any guarantee that the effort would produce a result you could live with, and that she thought he understood that too. She said she did not think understanding that was a small thing to have in common. The room was quiet. He said, after a long time, that his mother had had a saying. He said it was from the dialect she had grown up speaking, in a place where things were said simply because the people there had decided that simple and true were usually the same thing. He said the translation was approximate, but the meaning was this: the person who stays when the fire starts is the person who matters. He said his mother had sent it to him once, in a letter, many years ago. He said she had known the kind of person he was going to be, someone who ran toward fires, someone who was not afraid of the heat. He said she had also known, without needing to say it, that the more important quality was the willingness to stay in one place and be counted on by someone else. He said he had not been very good at that. He said it without self-pity and without drama, in the tone of a person stating a fact about themselves that they have had a long time to think about. She said she thought most people were not good at that. She said it took practice, and that the practice was harder than people imagined it would be when they started. He said nothing for a moment. Then he said goodnight. He said it in the quiet tone he used when something real had moved through the room, and both of them had decided to let it settle without examination. She said goodnight. She walked down the stone steps to her car. The evening was soft and cold. The street was lit amber under the trees. Behind her, one light burned in the window of the main room. Just one, warm and steady. She drove home. Grace was at the table with her book. Lily was on the couch explaining the rules of the flying horse's homeland to the horse itself, which she had drawn on a piece of paper and propped against a pillow so it could listen properly. Nadia hung up her coat. She sat beside Lily on the couch. She listened to the explanation of the rules, which were detailed and mostly fair, and she helped Grace find the word she was looking for in her history project, and she made dinner, and the evening was the evening, ordinary and warm, and exactly the right size. Later, when the girls were asleep and the apartment was quiet, she sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea and allowed herself a moment of honest assessment. Not the calculation. That was long settled. Something else. She had done something worthwhile. She was clear about that. Not something finished. Not something that had resolved itself into a clean conclusion, because real things very rarely do. The house on the north side would be the same tomorrow, and Enzo would be at the window when she arrived, and Gerald would have the task list ready, and the work would be the work. His body was still the body it was. Her rent was still the rent it was. The practical weight of things did not lift because of a conversation, or because of 5 months of showing up, or because of any one moment in a series of moments that had all been necessary. But something had been made that had not existed in October, something built by two people who both had more reasons than most to keep the world at a manageable distance, who had made, without planning it and without naming it, the harder choice. The choice to be present, to stay, to do the real work, which was not the task list and never had been. She set the cup in the sink. She checked the lock on the front door. She looked in on Grace, who slept with her book on the pillow beside her. She looked in on Lily, who slept with the drawn horse on the nightstand where she could see it. She set the alarm for 5:30. In the morning, she would go back. She already knew that. The alarm was a formality. She was going back because the work was real, and because she had chosen it, and because choosing it, each morning, was the truest thing she knew how to do. She turned off the kitchen light. The apartment was quiet and dark and safe, and tomorrow was already here.